A lot, everybody, for inviting me here once again. It's really nice to be with you, not only in spirit, but in body this time. It's been a very, very long time since I've been here. So really appreciate the invite. It's always an honor, a privilege, and a pleasure to be here with you and to have an opportunity to share a little bit of my truth. For those of you who have heard me speak before, you probably know by now that my truth comes in the form of stories, not facts, not certainties, just stories. Stories from history, from philosophy, from different myths and spiritual traditions, and yes, even from my own personal life. Today, the story I would like to share with you was prompted by this beautiful human being over here, Peter Scales. We were talking over email about the different topics that I could address for today's service. And out of the back and forth, he was throwing ideas at me and he hit me with something, a provocative question that immediately landed for me. And the question that he asked is, can someone be both spiritual and scientific at the same time? Let me tell you something. My mind was going in a million different directions at once. And actually, it kind of was like the beginning of Attila's prelude, where it was like, I was like going in many different directions. So I immediately started writing lots of notes and I had a good outline and I felt good. And then 2 nights ago, I made the mistake of talking to my good friend Chelsea. And she was asking me, like, why are you up so late? Just putting the finishing touches on this talk about science and spirituality, and I posed the question to her, can you be scientific and spiritual at the same time? And she thought for a moment. And then she dropped this bomb on me. She said, spirituality? I don't even know what that is. It's not that she's never heard the term before. It's that she couldn't define it when asked. And sure enough, we started talking, and the more we tried to unpack and define this word, the more elusive it became. And so defining this term is not a challenge that I'm prepared to attempt this morning. But I do feel that we have to kind of create some kind of general understanding of what we're talking about here. So instead of trying to pinpoint what spirituality is on a map, I'm just going to try to kind of outline its borders, right? And that way we have a frame of reference. So I think that there's a distinction between religion and spirituality. I don't know if anybody here would agree with that. They're not exactly the same thing. They're maybe related and connected, but they're different. And so we can say that spirituality is not religion, right? That kind of gives us an idea of the border there. And the other piece of it too is if we're talking about science, we kind of have to define that term a little bit as well, because the last few years have shown me that there are many people out there who talk about science in a way that reveals their ignorance of the subject, right? Science is a method. It's a method of inquiry. So when people tell you the science says this, that's not how science works. It's a process of elimination. It's a method of ruling out things that we can disprove, and whatever's left is the theory of the day. So I just wanted to get those two things out of the way real quick. And then I wanted to give you a personal story, which I think will further outline what we may mean when we talk about spirituality. And the story is about an 8-year-old boy who's daydreaming about his upcoming summer holidays. 2 months of freedom, baby. No school, no bedtime, just riding his bike, playing D&D until the wee hours of the morning with friends, lots of video games. This kid was excited. But then something went wrong. In his fantasy, the boy realizes that after 2 months of freedom, he must go back to school. And that's when he asks the fatal question. And then what? And then what? Because after the next school year, there's another summer holidays and then another school year until... So this poor kid, he's a little bit shocked by this. He sees this like alternating summer break and school year chain, like a link of chains going into the future and fading into the distance. And he feels a little bit of panic, okay? So he does what any good lad would do, right? He turns to mom and he says, Mom, What happens after elementary school? High school, dear, the mother replies in a distracted, disinterested tone. But the boy isn't done. And then he asks, what happens after high school? The mother puts down her magazine, giving him her full attention. Then you go to university. Why? There's a shrill edge to the boy's voice. Well, the mom says, because once you get a degree, you'll get to have a really, really good paying job. And then what? What do you mean? Maybe the mother hasn't thought this far ahead yet, or maybe she has. And what she has seen scared her so bad she doesn't even want to think about it. Either way, she's blocked. Her eyes are blank and uncomprehending, so the boy takes this opportunity to continue. So I'm supposed to go to school, right? And then graduate and go to university, and then I get a good job, and then what? Retire and die? Is that really all there is to life, Mom? Poor mother. Fear and panic flash across her face, and then she says, well, of course it is. What did you think it was all about? Before storming out of the room. You know Peter Parker? He got bit by a radioactive spider, and that's how he became Spider-Man. Or Bruce Wayne, right? He watched his parents get murdered in cold blood, and then he became Batman. Well, this story is a little bit like my origin story. Not that I'm a superhero, of course, but that short conversation many, many years ago set me on the path that I currently follow. I didn't know it then, but that conversation is the moment my destiny began to unfold. In that conversation with my mother, I was touching on a line of questioning that branches off in many different directions. What I was looking for in that particular day, in that particular exchange, was less about what happens after death, less about life after death, which is something that Guy spoke about in a very engaging way last week. What I was asking about is life before death, right? What's the point of it? Of this human experience? What's the goal? What does it mean? What is it all for? This, I feel, is firmly within the jurisdiction of spirituality. So once again, if we're talking about spirituality, I would like to suggest to you that these questions and those topics fall within that territory. Right? We haven't pinpointed it on the map yet, but we've got a good outline of what we're talking about. That fateful conversation with Mom triggered skepticism in me. I didn't believe in my heart that life was simply a meaningless chain of tasks leading inevitably to my permanent and final end. I felt certain that there was indeed more to life than the endless cycle of pursuit and avoidance and staying alive and satiating basic needs. But I was only 8 years old at the time, so I did what any 8-year-old would do. Went back to playing with my G.I. Joes, and I let these thought seeds rest. I gave them time to germinate and gather strength. And as you could probably tell, they gathered a lot of strength. I became very curious. I was drawn to the mythic, anything from comic books and video games to actual mythology like Sumerian, Egyptian, Greek, Roman, indigenous. These things interested me, and I didn't know why, but I was drawn to them. And so inevitably, it led me to study religion and philosophy and science. And now, despite my interest in religion, at no point did I consult the Bible for information about the way the natural world operates. Never crossed my mind to look in the Bible to figure out how gravity works, you know? For reliable answers on these topics, I basically stuck with science. Myth and scripture might give us insight into the minds of our simpler ancestors, I thought at the time. But to study and understand how the universe works, you need something serious. You need the scientific method. And so I kind of dismissed the value of religion, and I especially dismissed the mainstream Christian view of God. But you'll notice a shift in my language now. Our topic is science and spirituality. But as I retrace my steps back through my early teenage years, I see now that I equated religion with spirituality. used them interchangeably as if they were the same thing. I hadn't realized yet that there was a difference. And so I kind of dismissed them both as a matter of fact, because what I saw in religion, especially in the sort of dogmatic, rigid version of religion that I was familiar with, I didn't see any value in that in terms of making good life decisions or figuring out how the world works. So that set me on a different course of rationalism and materialism, and ultimately I settled on a position of atheism. Now, have any of you heard of a website called Reddit by any chance? Yeah. Reddit is basically like a bunch of message boards. Like you can go on there and create a message board about like a TV show that you like. People can join, you guys can talk. Now on this website, there's a whole subsection dedicated to debating people, right? You go into these message boards to debate people. And for example, there's one for debating Christians. There's one for debating atheists. There's one for debating, any belief system that you can think of. And so for a while, during my short-lived atheistic phase, I frequented those message boards. I argued against religious conservatives, pointing out the glaring inconsistencies in their views, arguing from a place of logic, reason, and fact. I was also very smug and certain about everything that I was saying, by the way. Really enjoyed the smell of my own farts back then. I read Hitchens, I read Dawkins. I was down with the new atheists. They were groovy, my friends. I liked them. I really enjoyed watching them mock and deride religious believers and their beliefs. Most of all, I enjoyed being part of a team, right? I had my team. I was an atheist, and these people are against me because they're religious, they're theists, and my beliefs are based on peer-reviewed evidence, not primitive superstition. And facts don't care about your feelings. I'm sure you've heard this kind of stuff before. Luckily, this phase didn't last long for me. I'm glad to admit. Atheism was a pit stop. Francis Bacon says, "A little philosophy inclines a person's mind to atheism, but depth in philosophy brings a person's mind about to religion." I think he meant spirituality, but we'll let it slide. The problem with atheism, in my experience, is that it's a negation of belief. It's not an affirmative belief. It's not a belief in something. It's a belief that we don't believe in something, which is good. It's good to have that position outlined. But as a negative belief, it can't really fulfill the positive functions needed to answer those pressing questions that I stumbled upon as a young person. And after all these years, I was still searching. I had no answers. I still didn't know what it was all about, and I wasn't anywhere closer to getting a satisfactory answer. Science seemed to provide a solid framework for classifying, labeling, and understanding the mechanisms of nature, but it provided no clarity around those itchy questions from childhood. And then what? What's the point? Somewhere along the way, my parents, after raising me for 21 years as a heathen, decided to clean up their act, and they became baptized Jehovah's Witnesses. It's a radical transition, let me tell you, my friends. That was a shock. Now, my parents and I are very tight. I'm an only child, and we moved here from Montreal when I was pretty young, right around the time this story that I just told you takes place. So it was just me and my parents, no siblings, no friends, no community. So we were solid. And so when they converted to this new religion, I accepted it. And because I really wanted to have a good relationship with my parents, I even accepted to study the Bible with them and with their friends. And I got to meet members of their community, brothers and sisters, and I got to attend many of their functions. And along the way, I felt this new type of energy, and it was very strange to me. I began to see for the first time the beauty of community and the possibility of true, genuine, universal kinship. The JWs looked out for each other. They were kind and thoughtful and generous toward one another, even towards me as an outsider. And they seemed to operate from a genuine place of love and caring. But their actual beliefs, well, let's just say I wasn't too impressed. My logical mind turned up way too many inconsistencies and fallacies in their belief structure. And I simply couldn't reconcile it. As much as I loved the energy in the community, it was like, I can't subscribe to this. It doesn't make sense to my logical mind. But I wanted really badly to believe. So one day, I'm walking home from studying the Bible with my friend Tom, and I'm thinking about this dilemma of mine, this contradiction within me, right? Wanting to believe, but not being able to. And then I remember what my parents always say: pray, ask, right? I think that was the last talk I gave here. Ask and you shall receive. And that was the first time I did it. I said, what do I have to lose? So this is what I did as I was walking home on a beautiful sunny afternoon. I said, Jehovah God, please help me see the truth. Help me believe. I want to be a part of this community, but there's too many plot holes in your story. The story doesn't make any sense, but I'm open, Jehovah. Please give me a clear sign and I will follow you without question. Now, the fact that I am standing here in front of you today and not in front of a cart handing out Awake magazines might cause you to think that God didn't answer my prayers. But she did. Oh, yes, she did. Hallelujah. And she sent messengers that speak my language. And she told me all about herself. She sent Carl Sagan to me, who says, the nitrogen in our DNA, the calcium in our teeth, the iron in our blood, were made in the interiors of collapsing stars. We are made of star stuff. The cosmos is within us. We are a way for the universe to know itself. Amen. Tell me more, sweet Lord. She sent Albert Einstein, who said, a human being is part of the whole called by us universe. A part limited in time and space. You experience yourself, your thoughts and feelings as something separated from the rest, a kind of optical delusion of your consciousness. All right. So Einstein, I think he's telling us that we're the universe too. He's telling us that we're an expression of the universe, and this feeling of being separate and remote and distinct is a delusion of consciousness. Whew. All right, and by the way, these are scientists, right? Are we talking about scientists? Okay, just want to make sure. So in my early 30s, this message really hit home, harder than ever before. The great teacher, God, Jehovah, whatever you want to call it, she sent me Neil deGrasse Tyson, this fellow right here, and an updated version of Sagan's TV series, Cosmos. And while my wife and I were watching this show on the couch, I started to really feel it, guys. An overwhelming sense of awe, reverence, and wonder at the universe as described by science. Who would have thought? At the amazing beauty, symmetry, and complexity of it all. And at the ability of human beings to study and understand it. I mean, wow, how incredible. And that's when it started to dawn on me that the image of the universe as revealed by science is not, in fact, in contradiction with the idea of a higher creative power. To the contrary, science had been revealing the true nature of this power all along. As Einstein once again says, God reveals itself in the orderly harmony of what exists. And there is order, isn't there? And there is harmony too. Do we not see all the hallmarks and evidence of symmetry and structure, direction and purpose? Dare I even say methodology? Let's say we boil everything down to the four fundamental forces identified by physicists as fundamental: gravity, electromagnetism, the weak nuclear force, and the strong nuclear force. According to scientists, these are the four basic forces that make everything we see around us and everything out in space happen. Four basic phenomena. The existence of such measurable forces demonstrates structure, doesn't it? It demonstrates, at the very least, some kind of organizing principle. What I'm trying to say here, folks, is that we don't need a bearded dude in his bathrobe up in the clouds, snapping things into existence to explain it. We need only observe and study the pattern unfolding here and now, and we shall see that there is an intelligence at work behind, or perhaps within the scenes. Deschapdin, of whom I spoke earlier, poses an interesting question in his book, The Human Phenomenon. He asks, how can inorganic matter produce living organisms? How can something that's dead give rise to life? Furthermore, he says, how can a stupid universe produce intelligence? What he's implying here, what he's suggesting, is that the seeds of life must be there from the beginning, implicit in so-called inorganic matter, lying dormant until the right conditions are met. And then life blooms. The same can be said about intelligence. It must be built into the fabric of the universe itself. Otherwise, how could the universe produce intelligence and intelligent beings? Going back to what Carl Sagan said, we are a way for the universe to know itself. We are the universe becoming aware of itself. But in the process, we tend to forget that the thing we observe is also ourselves. We are the universe. We're it. And this is where the scientists and mystics both agree. My friends, this is a rich, rewarding topic, and I could talk about this for probably 12 hours, and I probably wouldn't even scratch the surface. We can go in so many different directions, and that's why I so love and appreciate the forum after the service, because then we have a chance to talk some more and have real meaningful conversations about this. Well, for now, I'd like to leave you with a hypothesis that science and spirituality, however we define spirituality, are not contradictory, but rather complementary modes of operation. And yes, they can both be carried out simultaneously. In fact, I think their full power will only become manifest when we fuse science and spirituality together. When we use them in isolation, they are imperfect, weaker versions of what they could be. And it's just a theory, but there's some evidence to suggest this, because thousands of years ago in India, this fusion happened. The rich Vedic philosophy that produced the Upanishads, the Bhagavad Gita, and also the spiritual milieu that birthed Buddhism, right? Buddhism came from this rich tradition, Vedic tradition. Well, that tradition emerged from such a fusion of science and spirituality, right? Thousands of years ago, yogis retreated to these forest academies called ashrams, and there they turned all of their attention inward in a one-pointed manner. Their goal? To systematically study themselves, their thoughts, and ultimately their subjective experience in a methodical way, just like a scientist would. These yogis dubbed their studies Brahma Vidya, which in Sanskrit means the supreme science. Why is it supreme? Well, because whereas other sciences are trying to understand external phenomena, the supreme science seeks to understand that which is doing the understanding. It's at the root of everything, right? Not just the observations. What's making the observations? Who is the observer? Now, in Sanskrit, they call it the Atman, and I've heard many people refer to it in different ways. Pure loving awareness, the self, that awake presence that's behind all the noise and all the thinking and all the identities, the very, very background of your soul. The idea that science will one day vanquish spirituality seems a little bit misguided to me, in my personal experience, and according to the testimony of countless scientists and mystics across time. It appears that the paths of science and spirituality eventually converge upon a common destination. And so, in my opinion, the old adage is true. all roads really do lead to Rome. Thank you.